Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and in this episode we're going to do It Came From the Network. The topic of this It Came From the Network: Clash of the Champions 2, Miami Mayhem. Now if you're not familiar with It Came From the Network, this is where we review the bad, good, sometimes great, sometimes horrible, often campy stuff you could find on the WWE Network, formerly. Now it's on Peacock. With that being said, we grade everything on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. Jumping right in, the first match of the night for the U.S. Heavyweight Championship. Barry Windham, freshly off turning heel and joining the Four Horsemen, versus Brad Armstrong. I thought this was a really awesome match. I kind of think it's funny. Brad Armstrong's a guy that doesn't really ever get the credit that he deserves on how good he really was, and he was awesome back in this time frame. Barry Windham, in this era from about 87 to about 94-ish, in that era, he was probably top 4 or 5 wrestler in the whole world, so this match was an awesome way to start the show. Barry picks up the win here with a claw hold for the pin, which I thought was awesome. It's one of those things, there's a couple moves that are so hokey, but they're so awesome that I still cheer for them. The claw hold being one, the poison mist being another, the human torture rack. There's moves that don't really hurt that much, but they still make me smile and I enjoy them, and I enjoyed seeing him use the claw here. I remember when he would wear the black glove and use that, so Windham picked up the win here. I'm going to give this one a 4. I thought it was really good, a really awesome way to start off the show. Next up, we get an interview with the Rock and Roll Express, which they do at ringside, which was pretty good. Rock and Roll are awesome. They're, again, one of the great tag teams of all time, which leads us to a signing on a yacht for Ric Flair and Lex Luger for the Great American Bash later that year, which is an awesome match, and I should probably review that soon. Let me know if you'd like to see that review. I believe it's let me know if you'd like to see me review the Great American Bash with Flair versus Luger. I think it's 88 is the year. And that might be one I do nearby. But anyway, I digress. A really cool piece of work. I kind of liked this era of contract signings where there wasn't always a fight at the end, a table flipping. There was some ominous foretelling with all of the Four Horsemen being there of, basically them saying, now that you're signed, watch your back, and we would see that play into effect later on in the show. But anyway, I thought it was really good. This was a really solid segment with the interview leading into that segment. I'm going to give that a 4 as well. I thought it was really awesome. Next up, we have the Fantastics versus the Sheepherders, which if you're not familiar with the name the Sheepherders, this was the Bushwhackers before they were the Bushwhackers. Before they were the Bushwhackers, they were an awesome... And not saying that they weren't great as the Bushwhackers, but they were more played as comedy. They were a super violent, awesome heel team, and they were amazing. Their matches against the Fantastics, this isn't even the best match they have against the Fantastics. They have a match against the Fantastics, which I dare say is one of the top 10 tag team matches of all time. This here is a really solid match in itself. We start off before they give the introductions. Before we get to the match, they go to commercial. We see coming back the night, they show people coming in on their limousines during the night, the Horsemen, some luminaries, but they show Lex Luger coming in, and then Lex Luger gets jumped by the Four Horsemen, which bloody him up. And I believe, and I wanted to say I remembered this, so I went and looked it up as well just to make sure I was giving you the right info. This was the first time on Jim Crockett Promotions that Luger was shown to be bloodied, which showed a different sense of weakness for Lex, that he could be attacked in that way. Because if you don't remember at the time, Lex Luger was looked at as like an unstoppable force. I digress. They go back to the match, which is again the Fantastics and the Sheepherders for the U.S. Tag Team Championships, which was the Fantastics tag titles that they held at this time. This is a really solid match. The Fantastics pick up the win here. I'm going to give this match a 4. I thought it was really awesome. Like I said, I love this pairing. This is a really solid match. Again, not their best match, but that would be like saying that Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat isn't their best match in '94, even though it's better than most matches you'll ever see. Just to put that out there. Coming off of that, we have a very tag team centric card here. The next match we have is Jimmy and Ronnie Garvin with Precious versus the Varsity Club of Rick Steiner and Mike Rotundo, which is funny, Rotundo and Windham just a few years earlier were the U.S. Express together, but I digress. And they have their Kevin Sullivan with them, who's put in a cage, like one of those. They did the managers in shark cage thing a lot back in this time frame. I wish they would bring that back. I wish they would bring managers back. AEW kind of uses managers, but they don't really use them like they were used in the 80s and early 90s. And the 70s even. I wish they would kind of bring that type of manager back. Paul Heyman is the closest thing to it, the advocate, or the tribal council as he's going by now. But I wish they would do that style again. But I digress. The story is there's something between Sullivan and Precious. Sullivan keeps holding up a piece of paper telling her to come there because Precious is holding the key for the cage. We see the match go on. So the Varsity Club, Sullivan and the Garvins and the Varsity Club, they put on a really solid match here. I was a little distracted by the story going on outside of the ring. The story between Sullivan and Precious was a little more interesting to me than the match itself was, and these are 4 really good wrestlers. I enjoy a lot of their work in other places. The Garvins pick up the win. Afterwards, Sullivan gets out of the cage. They attack, which brings Dr. Dusty Williams in the ring, who was sitting ringside to help out the Garvins, which is, I want to say, and I don't quote me on this, Ron Garvin is Jimmy Garvin's father. But anyway, I'm going to give this a 3. I thought it was solid. Probably my least favorite match on the night, but that's grading on a very high scale, because this, as you'll see, and as you've seen already, the matches are pretty solid all the way through here. Next up, we have Nikita Koloff versus Al Perez. The funny thing is, and I didn't mention this when I said Brad Armstrong. If you look at Brad Armstrong, in some pictures he looks a lot like Kenny Omega. If you look at Al Perez, almost every time I see Al Perez, even now, or even actually now when I see Seth Rollins, I think of Al Perez, because Seth Rollins looks like he could have easily been Al Perez's son. And I know they're not related at all. It's just funny how similar they look and how different the time frame is, because in a time like now, even though Al Perez got to be a decent level of a star, he was nowhere near the level that Seth Rollins is now. This was a really solid match. I mentioned it, I believe the last it came from the network I did, there was another Nikita match on there. Nikita was a guy that I was a big fan of. He's not the most technically sound wrestler in the world, but he had a charisma, kind of like a Brock Lesnar or a Bobby Lashley would, where you would believe him as a believable destroyer, as someone that could beat someone up in real life, and he gave that aura off, and he was presented as such. Nikita picks up the win by DQ here when Larry Zbyszko gets involved. I'm going to give this a 3. I thought it was a good match, not a great match. Again, kind of grading on a bell curve because the rest of the show is better than this, but I thought it was a good match. It was solid. It definitely fit on a Clash of the Champions card. Now we get to the main event of the evening for the Tag Team Championship. Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard versus Dusty Rhodes and Sting. I love this match. And I know There's going to be things that you've heard me complain about on other shows and even someone in here in this match. But because of the entrance, because it's Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, another one of the greatest tag teams of all time, because it's Dusty Rhodes, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, Sting on that list of one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. A lot of people kind of drag Sting now and say he wasn't that great of a wrestler. I call BS on that. I call total BS, because Sting was amazing back in the day. Sting had great matches, and it wasn't just with Ric Flair, and it wasn't just with the Four Horsemen. He had great matches with everybody, with Muta, with Terry Funk. He had great matches with Van Vader, with Cactus Jack. He had matches all up and down the card that were amazing. When him and Luger were a tag team, they had great tag team matches. So I call BS on that. Even his work in TNA, where he would wrestle like Jeff Jarrett or Kurt Angle, I thought he had great matches. So I call BS, because anybody that was alive during Sting's height and his popularity for that whole decade of the 90s and even beyond that, Sting was a top-tier wrestler. There's no way around it. He wasn't Jushin Thunder Liger, but neither was Arn Anderson or Tully Blanchard. And you can't tell me that Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard aren't two of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Or Dusty Rhodes. Dusty Rhodes was nowhere near on the level mat-wise of a Tully Blanchard or Arn Anderson, but his charisma and the way he made you believe made Dusty Rhodes one of the top wrestlers of all time. I digress here. The match goes on. It's a really good match. Come to the end, it ends up being a double disqualification. There's some ref bumps back and forth. The Four Horsemen all get involved. It ends up being a cluster. I'm going to give it a 5 just because I thought it was great. I loved seeing these four guys interact. I loved this incarnation of the Four Horsemen, which was Arn, Tully, Flair, and Windham. And, man, to me, that might be the best version. That or the first version, the original with Arn, Ollie, Tully, and Flair, are the two best versions of the Horsemen to me. And I go back and forth which one I like better. I like Ole Anderson. I like Barry Windham. And like I said, Barry Windham was at his absolute peak during this time frame. This was I just thought it was an awesome match. I really enjoyed it. Even though it had the chicanery at the end, I thought the match was really solid. Now, coming off of that, overall, I'm going to give this show a solid 4. I thought it was really good. Some parts great. The main event was definitely great. But I think for what it was, for Clash of Champions, which were a little bit more than the regular show they were giving us, but a little bit less than a pay-per-view, I thought it did a really good job. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was amazing. And again, let me know what you think down here in the comments. If you like this, if you've seen this, if you're going to go back and watch it, I definitely recommend watching the full thing through. It was definitely worth a watch of the full card. But that's what I have to say on that. If you're here, please hit the like button, comment, share. Again, if you want to see me do the Great American Bash with Lex Luger and Ric Flair, let me know, and I will definitely put that up soon, if not next, on my reviews for these. But let me know what you think. Hit me up down here in the comments, and if you watch this long, I know you like what we're doing here, so if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Also, if you watch this long to the end, put a man called Sting in the comments, and if you know, you know, because Sting is amazing. But anyway, I digress. With all this being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of It Came From the Network.